I want to remind everyone about VBS that's coming up starting next Sunday night, going through Wednesday. And we're excited about that, and a lot of work has gone into that. And of course, the Mad Dash at the end will begin pretty soon. So we're grateful for that and hope that you can be with us for that fun week. But all in all, we're grateful that you're here today. I want to share with you something that I read last night when I was just before I went to bed. And it's a book, not very long. It's called Sighing on Sunday, 40 Meditations for When Church Hurts. And no, that's not indicative of anything. It's just a book I'm reading, okay? But this is what was said, and I thought it was appropriate. It says, whatever your individual circumstances, corporate worship is always an act of resistance. In every pew sits a person whom Christ has rescued from the clutches of hell and redeemed for his glory. What's more, each worshiper has defied Satan's entrapments and sin's discouragements that very day in order to come into God's presence with praise. Like Anna, each of us shows up to worship against the world's odds, and Christ, who triumphed over evil on our behalf, meets us there. So I don't know what your circumstances are this morning, but we're glad you're here. We've been thinking about, throughout the course of, started in last year, we've been thinking about Abraham and the journey of faith that he was on. And we have made it through, just kind of walking through and setting the stage. We've made it through, and we're thinking now in Genesis chapter 18. God has made this promise that they're going to have a son. The son has yet to appear. Abraham has struggled with those promises. God has reassured him. In chapter 17, we looked at the notion that the promised son is near and that Abraham needed to embrace that promise, to believe that gospel, that good news that the son was coming into the world, even though it was about 24 years until before, or 24 years after the promise God made to him originally. And so now it is coming to fruition. And so when we come to chapter 18, and this is one of the interesting things that always happens when you preach through a text, or you teach through a text, or you're studying through a text, is that there are chapters that kind of surprise you. You think that the chapter is going to go this way, and it ends up going this way. And so as we think about this chapter this morning in Genesis chapter 18, we're staying with the idea the promised son is near, because chapter 17 is God's conversation with Abraham. And in the first part of 18, God reveals it then to Sarah that within a year's time she will have a child. And then there's this soliloquy, and we'll talk more about what that is. And God kind of lets us into his mind, into his heart, into his thinking. And then we see Abraham pleading on behalf of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And one of the things, the subtitle that we're going to try and drive home is, what God is trying to show Abraham here is, you've got a son who is coming. Now teach him to be like me. And it's very surprising because it's not what you think when you think of Sodom and Gomorrah and all of the events that surround it. And so, as we think through this, I want us to first of all just take the text as it is given to us, as it reveals itself to us. We're told in the first 15 verses the child is coming. In 16 through 21, we see that God's character is put on display. There's a statement in particular that helps us to understand his character. And then in verses 22 to 33, Abraham is actually modeling the content of God's character. And then hopefully after we walk through that, then we'll be able to make a connection down to us so that we can understand this as we journey in faith together. So let's begin first of all with the announcement of the child. And so the announcement of the child comes along with the approach of angels. So in chapter 18 and verse 1, and the Lord appeared to him at the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. Very common to do. They did not work in certain portions of the afternoon. That's why David took a nap in 2 Samuel 11. He was walking on the rooftop. It says, he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. And when he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth. And said, O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Now the use of the term Lord here it seems to be simply a term of respect. Doesn't seem to be an indication. There is discussion about whether or not Abraham recognizes, because you have these three beings, these three angelic beings approaching, there is discussion about, does Abraham recognize that one of them is indeed God? Well, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. Okay? It doesn't change for our purposes what's going on. You've got these three men, and he is bowing before them and showing them respect, strong ancient Near Eastern customs. And this is juxtaposed to Lot's treatment of strangers in chapter 19, but we'll deal with that a little bit later. So, he says this, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, rest yourselves under the tree. When I bring a morsel of bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come under your servant. So they said, do as you have said, and Abraham went quickly into the tent to Sarah, and said, quick, 3 seahs of fine flour. Now, 3 seahs of fine flour is about 6 gallons. They're over-preparing, okay? They're producing a lavish feast for these 3 men. Not just to eat in that moment, but probably to pack up and to carry with them as they continue on in their journey. So, knead it and make cakes. And Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set it before him, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. And so here he is showing extreme hospitality to these 3 individuals. Now here is where we get the first definite inclination within the context of their interaction that one of these 3 beings is more than just an angelic being. One of them is God. And it's the way that he speaks. So they said to him, verse 9, where is Sarah, your wife? Now, first of all, who was aware of the name change? That took place in chapter 17. The timing is kind of difficult to nail out between chapter 17 and 18, but in chapter 17 and verse 21, God said to Abraham, within a year you're going to have your son. In this text, he's going to say to Sarah, within a year you're going to have your son. So the timing got to be pretty close, okay? And so her name has been changed, but how many people are actually aware that her name has been changed? And so there may be an indication that that is what is going on, that they have picked up on, or this shows that they have a knowledge that not everybody has. And so he responds to her and says, she is in the tent. The Lord said, I will surely return to you about this time next year. Notice that. I will return to you this time next year. See that? Now, I don't know about you, miraculous powers of conception and birth, those are usually under the purview of God. So, he goes on to say, and Sarah, your wife, shall have a son. And Sarah was listening at the tent door behind him. Now, Abraham and Sarah were old and advanced in years. The way of women had ceased to be with Sarah. That is, she was past childbearing years. She had been through the process where that was no longer possible. So, as a result, Sarah laughed to herself, saying, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, shall I have pleasure? There's no way this is going to happen. I mean, she's almost 90 years old, all right? Almost 90 years old. And even though their lifespan was longer than ours, 90 was 90 to them, okay? So, the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? And then Sarah, of course, he says, at the appointed time I will return to you. About this time next year, Sarah shall have a son. He reaffirms it. But Sarah denied it, saying, I did not laugh, for she was afraid. And he said, no, but you did laugh. So he's holding her feet to the fire, saying, do you trust me? And so we're having this interaction with God. Okay? We're having this interaction with God where he is revealing himself, affirming this promise to her, and says, the child is coming. We've had a long history together. I made this promise. You brought Lot. I told you it wasn't going to be Lot. You tried to get ahead. I reaffirmed the promise to you in 15. You tried to get ahead with Ishmael. I told you it wasn't Ishmael. I told you it was going to be someone else. So I reaffirmed the promise again in 17. And now here we are in 18, 24 years later. Now I'm telling you, the time is up. So, now that we're having a child, let's think about having that child and what it means to parent that child. So when we come then to verses 16 through 21, we are given kind of a soliloquy. Now, that's not necessarily a term that, I don't hear it thrown around just a bunch, okay? Except for in reading and in other places in literature and stuff like that. Plays, if you're involved in that. So a soliloquy is kind of like, so it's very similar to in a play, and of course in a play you're restricted on certain things. It's very much obviously not like a movie. And so in a play you might see the main character, they're interacting with someone, and then the lights kind of go dim on everybody else and a special light on the character that's under discussion, and then they will give you insights into what they're thinking about the situation that's transpiring in the play. Okay? And so it's a way of the main character revealing to you what they're thinking. They're explaining their actions or a number of other things. And so what is happening here is that soliloquy where God is saying, okay, I want you to listen in to what I'm thinking now. So it's like he pauses the play, and before he says anything to Abraham or anything to the three and Abraham get together and have this discussion, he says, I'm going to tell Abraham something. So listen into what he says. He says, the men set out from there, and they looked down toward Sodom. Abraham went with them and to set them on their way, which is a common custom. And we still kind of do it today. When people are leaving, many times we'll walk them to the door or walk them outside to their car or whatever it may be. So that's what he's doing. And the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Now, because we have the fullness of revelation, we know what's going to happen. We understand Sodom and Gomorrah and what's going to transpire there. And he says, shall I hide it from him what I'm going to do? Seeing that Abraham shall surely become a great and mighty nation, and all nations of the earth will be blessed in him. And so God is basically saying this. Here are my inner thoughts. I need to tell Abraham what I'm doing. Now, not out of a sense of obligation that he somehow owes Abraham an explanation, but in the sense that Abraham, through him, all the nations of the earth are going to be blessed. He has an interest in the nations, but he also has an interest in his own nation. And what is going to transpire talks about the importance of righteousness and justice. And he needs to know the consequences, and he needs to know the importance of teaching his new son, which will then blossom into an entire nation. He needs to know the importance of teaching them to be like me. Because what they are taught will affect how they behave. So he says, verse 19, for I have chosen him that he may command his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he has promised him. Now, righteousness and justice. When we read those terms, our minds will probably go in a number of different directions. But a more accurate understanding, and I'm reading ESV and your translations may read this, but a more accurate understanding of this, because we have this association. God is fixing to go down and he's going to wipe Sodom and Gomorrah off the map. So acts of righteousness and justice rain down holy horror. But that's not what this means. What these words actually mean are acts of kindness and mercy. Teach them to be like me. I know that Abraham's going to teach his children to be like me, involving acts of kindness and mercy. You see, for too long we have understood God as we think God's nature is to punish and to harm. No, if you read Scripture carefully from beginning to end, you will find that when God punishes or has to bring harm upon anyone or any nation or any group of people, He has to be provoked. You've got to push Him. You've got to keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing, because that's not His natural response. His natural response to humanity is to be gracious and merciful and kind. That's God's natural response. And people say, okay, well, how does that square then with what's fixing to happen? Well, let's keep reading. In verse 20 said, the Lord said, because the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and their sin is very grave, I will go down to see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know it. You see, if the notion that God is a quick-triggered being who's going to angrily punish, why does He bother coming down and actually seeing what's going on? You think God, He didn't already know what was going on? But then you see this phrase, it says, ESV translates it, I want to see if they have done altogether according to the outcry. And the outcry is talking about cries of injustice. It's used in Genesis 4 about the slaughter or the murder of Abel. But a more literal translation of it, to see if they have made a complete end. I want to go down and see if they've made it a complete end. In essence, He's giving them every single opportunity to whether they've made a complete end. You remember in Genesis 15 when we were there and God talks about to Abraham's descendants, He's going to give the land of Canaan. And He says, I cannot give it to you right now because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet full. It would be unjust for me to kill them and just hand you land. But in the process of all these years, their sinfulness, they will continue to digress into sin to the point to where I will have to punish them. And what He's saying here is just that. I'm going down. Now look, He knows what it is, but I'm going to walk in and I'm going to, in essence, see it for myself. And I'm going to make sure that they have really pushed the envelope as far as it can go. Now, I don't know about you, but I call that extreme patience. Extreme mercy. Extreme acts of kindness. Because that's who God is. So then, as we go through this, Abraham begins to model the character of God. Watch what Abraham does. And this text is so often neglected in this discussion. It says, so the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, but Abraham stood still before the Lord. Then Abraham drew near and said, will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you sweep away the place and not spare it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to put the righteous to death with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be it from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just? What is Abraham doing? He's pleading on their behalf. You know, there are a lot of preachers who like to see themselves as the prophets of the Old Testament. The only problem is they can only see one side of the prophets of the Old Testament. The prophets of the Old Testament didn't just announce judgment coming, they wept over it. They begged God not to do it. And this is exactly what you see Abraham doing. He has compassion for the people. And he says, God, if there are 50, will you spare them? God says yes. And then as he continues down, 45. Well, what about 40? 30? 20? 10? Now, there is a background to this that I think we need to understand, and that is This is an old haggling custom in the ancient Near East that still exists in many parts of the world. If you've ever been to a bazaar or some kind of peddler's mall, bargaining mall, where you go through and you start negotiating the price of things. Nothing is necessarily fixed. It's all negotiable. And people say, well, that can't be what's going on here because God never comes back and offers a counter argument. Because that's God. His grace is so vast. He said 50. Yep. 45. Yep, I'll take it. 30. I'll take it. 20. Deal. 10. Deal. So when we look at Abraham, you see these two things: compassion and intercession. He feels for the people who stand under God's judgment, and he intercedes for them. You think Abraham doesn't know what's going on in Sodom? But he is not one to rejoice in the destruction of people who are sinful. And God help us, sometimes I think we are. And if we are, we're not like God. So let's try and make this connection a little bit. Let's be redundant here for a minute. Here's God. He is compassionate and he intercedes. Ezekiel 33 and verse 11, I take no delight in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked would turn from his evil way and live. That's what God wants. God is for life. He wants people to live. He intercedes for them. You remember Isaiah 53, the suffering servant. The last thing that's said of him is what? And he made intercession for the transgressors. Our lack of patience for people in sin does not reveal us to be righteous. It reveals us to be unlike God. And it reveals not that we are hard on sin, but that we have forgotten that we ourselves were too once deceived and sinful. This is Titus 3. And so I can consider myself hard on crime and tough and all these different things about sin and all the... And furthermore, as I'm hard on the sins of others, I have found that many who are hard on the sins of others are awfully gracious to themselves. It's interesting how that works, isn't it? Abraham, compassion. God, don't do this. Now you have to remember, this is Abraham. This is the man who is held up in the New Testament as an example of faith all throughout it. But it's not just Abraham who did it. Moses does it in Exodus 32, 33, and 34. Samuel does it in 1 Samuel chapter 12. Countless people do it. Jesus' whole work in his ministry and his crucifixion is just this: God be merciful. And you know what? In this context, Abraham was giving birth to the nation of Israel, and that's exactly what God wanted Israel to be. In Exodus 19, when he enters into covenant with them, he tells them, in Exodus 19, beginning in verse 5, he tells them, now therefore, if you will indeed obey my voice and keep my covenant, you will be my treasured possession among all peoples, for the earth is mine, and you shall be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. A kingdom of priests. Priests not only represent God to the people, but they represent the people to God. And so Israel was to learn that they were not to hate the nations. They had not been chosen because God hated the nations. They had been chosen because God loved the nations and He chose to save the nations through them. He wanted them to be compassionate and to intercede and to love the nations the way that He always did. But you know, here's the interesting thing. This text in Exodus 19 is picked up in the New Testament directly. In 1 Peter chapter 2, when he's talking to Christians, he says this, 1 Peter 2, beginning in verse 9. But you are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for His own possession, that you may proclaim the excellencies of Him who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. Once were not a people, but now you are God's people. Once you had not received mercy, but now you have received mercy. What does God want us to be? What is a person of faith? He's number one. He or she is number one, compassionate. People say, why? Read verse 10. Who once were not the people of God, but now are. Who once had not received mercy, but now have received mercy. It is mind-boggling that people that would receive mercy would be against other people receiving the very same thing. It's mind-boggling. And then that we would intercede for them. What do you see these saints, these holy people doing in chapter 2 and verse 9? We're proclaiming the excellencies of the one who called us out of darkness into His marvelous light. We're not saying, you got what you deserved. We're saying you don't have to live that way. It doesn't have to be this way. Isn't that God? If that's not God, then I don't know that I understand anything that I read in Scripture. Because if that's God, Jesus doesn't come. There's no compassion for us as sinners. You're sinners. You get what you deserve. There's no intercession. I'm certainly not going to do anything about it. I mean, you got yourself into this mess. You just face your own consequences. And see, here comes the reality. This is the true test of faith. A lot of people believe that you can know a person is developed in their faith because they know more about the Bible after all these years of studying it. Or their attendance chart looks more full. Or they're harder on sin and there are some people that are described to me that I don't know them, but I meet them and they're like rough and gruff and really difficult to get along with. And they're like, oh yeah, that's a spiritual man. Listen to me. Those are not marks of spirituality, and that's not a spiritual man or woman. The mark of spirituality, of becoming like God, is not how rough you are, it's how gentle you are. You show me a man or a woman who is gentle, and I'll show you a man or a woman who's become like God. Jesus said, come to me all who are laboring and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart. And then in chapter 12, he would quote Isaiah and say, you know that burning wax, that flick, that burning wick that sits in a candle that you could just Jesus says, I would never be the one to snuff you out. I will not cry. I will not raise my voice. I will not be a person of war in the streets. I will be a gentle man amongst sinful people, compassionately interceding for them. Because that's what faith is. That's what being like God is. I may walk around and I may get some pats on the back because I told people how it was and I put people in their place and I did all these different things. I might have done a lot of things, but I didn't act like God. And so the question for us is, are we like God? As time passes, as life happens, do we become harder and rougher and gruffer? Or do we become gentler and more understanding? Only one of those is like God. This morning, God's compassion for all of us is here. His intercession for us is here. The promised Son is not just near in the sense that He is coming into the world, but has already come into the world, but He is near in the sense that He draws near to us and meets us in worship. He draws near to us and meets us in our weaknesses. He draws near to us and meets us in our sinfulness. And if we're willing, with a penitent faith, to confess Him and to be baptized in water for the forgiveness of our sins, He meets us there. We meet Him at the very place He died for us. It's Romans 6. Or maybe we are struggling with sin. Maybe we're struggling with life. Whatever it may be, it would be a great and a grand opportunity for us to help one another, to show compassion for the struggles of each other, and to intercede for each other. And if we can help you do that this morning, we would love to as we stand and sing this song.